Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your attendance at the Regulatory and Licensing Committee meeting of 25th of September. And welcome to those of you watching live streaming at home. The first item on the agenda this evening is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, Chair, we've got Warfield, Long and Yates.
Thank you. That's recorded. Do we have any declarations of interest from anyone? No, thank you. And so item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting. I assume everyone has read and digested them. Are you all happy that they are a true record of that meeting?
Sorry, Chair, just in relation to item 4, the discussion was that if this was the legislation under which this footpath was being brought forward and the construction had not started, it was the correct format. As the construction was nearly completed, it should come back in a different format. I know the minutes are correct. We resolved that the chair and the leader of that section could make the decision if that was correct. But I think since then we've shown that it isn't. So is it coming back? Does that make sense?
Yes, I can see what you're saying.
Basically, it came through under the wrong part of the legislation last time. And is it coming back again?
Do we have an answer to that, or do we need to look into it?
We'll look into it and we'll email.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else comments on the minutes? Then I will sign as a true record. Thank you. Item number 4, the polling places review. I think I'm saying Chrissy is leading that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as many of you are aware, our electoral registration officer and returning officer, Simon Fletcher, Chief Executive, is away at the moment. So I'm bringing forward the report to begin the polling places review. We have had to modify the original presentation that we were going to bring to this committee due to the by-election that has been called in Tamworth, the parliamentary by-election that will take place now on the 19th of October. So had that not gone ahead, had that not been called, then it's likely that we would have immediately started this consultation window to get it over and done within time for the PFCC. But obviously because of that new requirements and the additional resourcing it will require from our elections team and other departments within Lichfield to support, then the capacity isn't there. So hence it's a slightly odd reporting that we're asking for permission to do consultation next year, just conscious that it's on the work programme, but just to explain that we will be doing a light touch review in readiness for the PFCC, but it won't be the full formal legislative review that's required under statute for us to do every 5 years. So the last one was done as the report states, and we do have to do one now before January 2025. I've highlighted within the report the timetable we will follow for the formal steps that the consultation will follow, in which we will open up consultation windows and we will write out formally to everybody's involved. But in the meantime, what I have done within this report is flushed out all of the issues that came to a head during the last election and all of the feedback that we've had subsequently since that. And it would be really useful, as the recommendations point out, for you to note that we are going to do that formal consultation next year in readiness for that window opening shortly after the next elections that are planned. And then for us to consider any items that we want to do in readiness for that election on the 2nd of May from the learning that we've had from the recent elections. So happy to take any questions, but I think this would be a really useful constructive dialogue for us to talk about what we know and some of the situations and answer any members' questions about what polling places we use and why.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Chair. 3 things. I think, Chris, you're already aware that I raised the issue of when polling booths are moved, how well the advertisements go on to tell people they've moved in advance of it happening, rather than a A4 piece of paper. Can we ensure that that is built into next time if we are going to move something? We definitely make sure that people know, even if it's a bright piece of paper in the polling section when they get their polling card, just to tell them that it's moved, because 90% of people I spoke to the day before still didn't know. The second point is, I noticed the Priory Grange is not being considered again, but something else that someone brought to my attention was the fact, because it was in a public place where the toilets were in the children's changing rooms, they felt it was an inappropriate place under child safety and child protection issues. But if that's going to be moved anyway, but if we can bear it in mind for any other further choice. And the last one was, it makes reference to Bowley Park. Darwin Hall insisting on their payment beforehand. Darwin Park is on Lemonsley, so I'm assuming we mean Bowley Hall, Council Hall at Bowley Park.
Limited Darwin Hall, apologies, that's me. No,
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I accept that there is often difficulty in using schools, but frequently there is no other alternative. However, I negotiated with Chase Terrace Primary School quite a long time ago now to just close part of the school, and maybe that might be acceptable in other places, because when there is no alternative, it is important that people get the opportunity to vote within their ward and not have to move into another ward just to vote, and it does confuse people. The importance to me as well is that we ensure that things are open, the gates are open, because in my ward, Boney Central last night, I was contacted by somebody because the lower gate was not open, and apparently it was on the head teacher had said not to open the lower gate, which was stopping a lot of people from actually voting, and they had to go and some of them didn't vote at all in the end, because it's quite a long way to walk round to the front of the school, and it's on a hill, and for elderly people or people who haven't got that kind of time, it was restricting people from going. I was told that it was because the nursery unit at the very bottom was open, and so as a safeguarding issue, that's why they didn't open the gate. But in the end, I did get the gate open because I had a number of people that were concerned. So I think it's important to note that wherever we have a polling station, that all the accesses are available to people, because of the fact that it does stop people voting, and we should never be doing that. Another thing that I did notice at one stage, which Councillor Ennis might wish to make mention of, was I took somebody to polling station at the leisure centre who lived on Hollybrook Meadows, and it's a heck of a way to walk to that polling station for people who have not got cars. So I know again that there are not many places that are available for people to go. And I also notice in the report that it says that people are being encouraged not to have the polling stations that are the temporary ones because of the cost, etc. But I think there are times when it is inevitable, and we have to give everybody the opportunity to vote. And therefore, I think that needs to be quite an important issue, because I notice that some of the schools now are saying that they don't wish their buildings to be used anymore. And I know that you can make them use it, but even so, that is not necessarily fair, particularly with primary schools, where parents do have a problem with childcare often. So I think we need to take into consideration the needs of the buildings such as schools when we are using them for polling stations, and try as much as we can to make alternatives, even if it is maybe having a temporary station on within the confines of the school, which has happened at Chase Terrace Academy as well. So I think that we do need to ensure that everybody, and it does mention in here that everybody who's disabled or elderly has the opportunity to walk to a station if at all possible, because a lot of people do not have a vehicle that they can get to. So I hope that those things are all taken into consideration.
Thank you, councillor Evans. I noticed that Chrissy Dimmers was making copious notes there. Would you like to come back on any of that?
Yes, please. Just on a couple of things as well that councillor Chetland pointed out as well. The notification of changes to polling stations are always included on the polling cards
Yeah, they are.
on the bottom. Unfortunately, we cannot change the layout and the format of those polling cards because they're statutorily prescribed. So the notices that we put on there are what we can legally do to inform people. So it's really important that people, when they receive their polling cards, do check and confirm where their polling stations are, because there are boundary reviews and things like that that happen in between as well, where sometimes your polling station can shift from one boundary area to another. So it's really important to appeal to everybody that when you get that polling card, that you do double check and confirm that you understand where your polling station is. Obviously, we do press releases at the time, but unfortunately, because of the timetables of some elections and the lateness with which some of the venues either confirm or refuse us to use them, it does mean that it can be, literally a couple of days before the next phase of the election kicks in. So the capacity that we have to get that message widespread is very, very limited because of that timescale that we're working to. So the polling cards is absolutely the best place for people to check and confirm and double check. And we do on those polling cards as well give people all of the correct URLs and information as to how to contact us and when they can come into the council to check and confirm those details, because things in elections unfortunately do happen in a very time critical way, and getting that message widespread isn't possible in that sort of 2 or 3 week period that we do have to get the word around. So I'll take on board your points, but it's just to re-emphasise that we are very hamstrung in terms of how far and how widely we can make that information available.
Sorry, I appreciate that you can't change the polling cards. I just wonder whether a bright piece of paper can be added with the ones where something's changed, just saying your polling booth's moved.
So again, they're not enveloped, they are a pre-formed mailing that we buy, so we cannot interfere with that process. Unfortunately, we would have to print and send out a separate communication, a separate letter by the Royal Mail, or arrange for hand delivery of those, and given the timescales involved, again, that would be a huge logistical exercise for us. So the appeal really is for people to check and double check their polling cards to make sure they understand where they're required to go. I take on board your points about Priory, and yes, that was a punt. And it sort of links into the points that Councillor Evans was making as well about the temporary locations. So the mobile stations, they are yes, they are very costly, and yes, they do create an additional logistical challenge for all of the officers involved. But the chief issue that we have with those mobile stations is about the safety and accessibility of them, and the availability now of mobile polling stations, because they aren't commodities that you come across very, very quickly and very easily. So being able to scale up and scale down the requirements for those, we can normally get hold of a couple of the larger size one that we need now to comply with the new accessibility regulations. But because the demand is nationwide, we are in the queue with all 400 other authorities, and they just aren't making them to the size and scale that we need in the speed in which we need them to come through. So we have to be very selective about where we can do them, but the location of a temporary station has to have a means of for people to get to it in a safe and secure way. So it should be in an area that's accessible to those people who are in the polling district. But it also needs to be on a piece of land where we can gain agreement from that landowner to place it. And because they are there for a week, because you can't hire them for anything less than that, a lot of people are very reluctant because they will cause damage within that week's period. So it's just a fact that there are logistical issues, not just the cost, whilst that is a consideration for us, particularly when we're putting the bill or passing the bill on to parish councils, is that that limitation is physical and getting the cooperation of everybody who's involved. And obviously the same goes for schools. If a school flags a particular issue, or we are asked to find alternatives, of course we go and look for them, and we engage with as many people as we can to do that. But at the end of the day, the election has to happen on the date that it has to happen, and we have to provide suitable stations within those polling districts to be able to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to vote in a safe and accessible way. It does give us some very difficult choices from time to time, and whilst you know, everybody would want there to be a community centre or a suitable space that's available, there isn't in a lot of our polling areas. So particularly those ones that I've mentioned in the report, if there are you know, locations that are known to members or to members of the public who are watching this, or that you engage with, then please do pass them along, because we think we've thought of everything, but there might be something that's coming downstream, a vacant shop unit or a community room that we're not aware of, and that local intelligence, that feeding through to us is really, really important in us helping to ascertain these sites and these suitable locations.
Thank you. Councillor Bracken.
Thank you. Yes, there's just one issue that I want to bring up on where it says if there's any other issue that the committee need to identify. One of the polling areas in Stowe, as the polling station moved from Scotch Orchard School to the football club, and that proved quite difficult for some people. From the distance from the Woodlands and Wisard Road is quite considerable to get to the football club. Clearly, we want access for people without cars, both because we don't have cars and for our green agenda. And actually, there was a lot of difficulty parking in the little bit of road outside the football club. That was quite difficult on the day. So I would like that one to be added. I mean, the only solution I could come up with would be a temporary one on the green and Furnival Crescent next to the school, but again, you know, you've outlined the problems of the temporary issues, but the football club didn't seem to be a good alternative to the Scotch Orchard School.
Taking notes on that. Do you want to quickly come back on that, or?
No, if we can just talk and confirm which area you're talking about, we can see who owns it and whether or not they'd be amenable. I mean, as I say, the caveat is that the mobile units, you know, the ones that we have, because we have them regularly, we've got them secured, and the providers generally know, but getting new or adding to that list,
I think
It's
that
pretty
brings it
increasingly
down to
difficult.
one, but we need
Yeah.
to confirm it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Ansell.
Thank you, Jack. I'm not quite sure where the polling was in Stowe this time in Scotch Orchard, because I use a postal vote, but following something that Councillor Evans said a few years ago, I spoke to the then head of Scotch Orchard School and said I thought she'd be able to isolate just the lower 2 years, and then it did happen subsequently for at least one election.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ennis.
Yes, just looking at the Chasetown wards ones, obviously, because that's where we are. I am anyway. Mining College, obviously, we knew that wasn't going to be available at the time, and it went to Chasetown Methodist Church, which I have to point out is actually in Chasetown, not Hammeridge Wall. But we had a couple of older residents contact us because they hadn't actually had their polling cards come through, so they didn't realise it moved. I went down to try and help them. They'd already gone, and which is for me not even a 10-minute walk. I think it was half an hour round trip walk for them. So obviously that's just an issue. They didn't get the polling cards. In future, obviously, the thing that they can. The only obviously problem we've got is, as Councillor Evans will know, Chasetown literally has no community buildings apart from Learning College and the church and the leisure centre. So I can understand over on the new estate, as we call it by Morrison's, it is a check, but there is nowhere else around there to do it. And as we say, unless you're gonna have a mobile unit, which we're not gonna get, the only option we really have would be the leisure centre. Now, I know we've had a few complaints. But obviously, if we give them enough warning, they're gonna know. It's something that Lichfield District owns, so it's something that we can use, and it's not. There's a lot of rooms, so I'm assuming there could be different rooms that we could use. There is a lift to go upstairs, so if someone's moaning about the squash course, maybe we could use a different room. But that's the only thing I can say. There's the problem in that area is there's just nowhere for anyone to go. Unless something happens with the mining college and it can come available at some point. I think that's all, the only thing you can do, obviously, there's all speculate that I have children against St Joseph's and Century, so full child one's left. And I work there. Unless they're willing to do between them and maybe Chase Town Community. Or there's the football club actually. The football club, you thought about Chase Town Football Club? That's just come to my mind, because they're having looking for new buildings, and that's it might be somewhere you might be able to go. And if anyone on the Holly Blue Meadows estate, they can, it's quicker walk. That just clicked, sorry, that just came to my head as well as saying that. So you could try Chase Town Football Club. That might be one. There you go, that's it.
Thank you, for the suggestion there. One observation from me, and that is on page 7 under the key emerging issues. The first suggestion would end. It states that, or asks whether these districts could be combined into other districts. This is actually a district, of course, it's the parish ward, but it's a confused one because it's a parish ward of Shenstone. It's a ward in the Bourne Vale area. So I don't quite know how you reword that, but points to that, that's all. No other questions for that. So can I just verify that everyone is happy to accept the recommendation as laid out at part 2, 2.1 and 2.2? Have you got hands on that? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. On to item number 5, which is the adoption of revised conditions for pavement licenses. I think Christy, you've taken the part. Or is it Jack?
No, it's me.
Oh, Jack, thank
Yeah, I
you.
took this one, Jack.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, COVID caused a few things. One of them was a relaxation of controls on pavement licenses, with the idea being to support businesses through a rough patch. The regime was extended, and it's going to be extended again until 30th of September next year. So this relatively simple report is merely taking the opportunity to simplify the conditions on these payment licenses. There are things like references that include restrictions that existed during the pandemic that no longer do. And essentially the report is to request approval of the simplified payment license conditions. Current conditions are Appendix 2 and the proposed version is Appendix 1, which bizarrely in my pack are, I've got Appendix 2 first and then Appendix 1 second. So the 2B is Appendix 1. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions from the floor? Councillor Evans.
Yes, I recognise that the £100 for the licence, which I think is acceptable, as long as there is careful assessment done beforehand, which I assume there is, and it needs to be monitored, obviously, because people encroach a little bit further and a little bit further, and that also applies to smoking and the signs that are required to be there, because again, it is quite offensive to some people to be smoking where you shouldn't be smoking when they're on the pavement. And I notice there are going to be signs up. I hope that they are complied with. I wanted to ask whether we do get many complaints about the pavement license, because when it was first registered, it was when the disabled parking spaces were being taken away, and people did object then. And so it would be interesting to know if you have had many. And I'm keen to make sure that you know the measurements, which you said you will do. Because it says you need to have 2 wheelchairs to be able to pass each other. Comfortably. And so I think that people too with large pushchairs, etc., also need to be able to get past. I hope all those things are monitored, and if you do get any complaints, they are acted upon, because that's important that everybody feels that this system is working for them as well as for the people who are running the businesses. And I also think that it's a good idea that you've got pavement license as well, obviously in the better weather, for people in wheelchairs, because it's not always accessible if they want to get a drink and get into a building. I know you're supposed to have accessibility, but it still isn't always easy for everybody. So it does give people like that the opportunity to be able to sit quietly and have a conversation and a drink. So I think monitoring is important, and ensuring that the rules are complied with.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, Councillor Shepherd.
Good question. My baptism of fire to this committee was to chair it with 15 minutes notice. And at that one, I think we agreed that we weren't charging the £100 at that time. Have I missed a meeting where we're now charging the £100? We are charging £100. Good.
Yeah,
Yes,
complaints.
yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that comes under standard enforcement work. I think the majority of payment licenses are in Lichfield. We're monitoring all the time. My eyes are not shut, even though I'm on lunch breaks, and same with officers. We do get occasional complaints. We have one quite recently in relation to premises on Bird Street. Some of the issues relate to vehicles unloading, and then you end up in a situation where the pavement licenses have taken up the pavement, and then the vehicle's in the road, and there's very little room to get through. So that's something we're looking at as well. But yes, it's just comes down to simple enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. For no more questions, can I have the show of hands please on accepting the recommendation at 2.1 and including appendix 1 and 2? Great. Thank you very much. Karen. Item number 6 on the agenda is the extension of and amendments to the public space protection order for dog control. And I think we'll have to Jack on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, back in 1996, we had the Dog Fouling of Land Act. That was superseded by dog control orders, and then more recently it's become public space protection orders. Our current public space protection order is due for renewal in August next year, so it might seem like we're getting ahead of the game, but this proposal is actually to agree a course of action in terms of consulting primarily parish councils on things that might be affecting them in their area. And on the back of that, if we've got evidence that there are issues that can be covered by a PSPO, we will bring that back to this committee with proposals before going out to a statutory consultation. So this is a pre-statutory consultation, if you know what I mean. And essentially, obviously, we will consult members as well if anybody has any other proposals. So essentially, it is just to agree a course of action in consulting on what might be covered by a public space protection order in plenty of time, so that we can do the statutory consultation prior to August next year.
Thank you. Do you have any questions on that? Yes, Councillor Bigg.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I'm not sure about what is possible within these things, what you're consulting on. Clearly, I understand about the dog fouling. I mean, is it possible to say that in busy areas like the town centre and the Lichfield city centre, that dogs need to be on short leads, because the dogs on long leads are quite a problem when there's a lot of people about. Is it possible for big parks, say Beacon Park, to have areas where there aren't dogs, obviously you want a lot of the park to be accessible to dogs, but is that, are those sort of things possible within there? So.
Yeah, absolutely. It had public space protection orders have been described as you invent the law and then you enforce the law. Obviously, this is dog related. We're looking at here. Some authorities have come unstuck in banning begging and that sort of thing, but this is purely dog related. And yes, you can. The difficulty comes with enforcement. So, for example, Beacon Park, if you said no dogs in a certain area, how do you stop the situation where a dog might sort of go onto that area of its own accord? The person didn't intend to commit an offence, but the dog has got its own mind. So this is why normally bans on dogs relate to things like children's play areas where they're fenced off, and you can easily control that. But dogs on leads, there's another neighbouring authority that's got a public space protection order that means that all dogs on a highway have to be on a lead. I don't know if they specify the length of lead. Part of the issue is evidencing it being a problem, to sort of prevent the backlash from dog owners who perhaps want a bit more freedom. We can assume that dogs not being on leads on a road will cause problems from time to time. It's a balancing act, really. So the decision ultimately is this committee. So.
Right, but all those things are possible.
They're possible, yeah.
And it's up for parishes and other people to
exactly
to give their
exactly. I mean, there have been situations where I've gone to parish councils and they've had an incident where, a dog has run up to some school children and scared them just by running towards them, and they wanted to ban dogs or were thinking about possibly banning dogs. And with that, it's the balancing act of, well, have you got anywhere where dog owners can throw a ball for the dog? Well, no, not really. And we've got fear of some school children in relation to a dog that's off a lead, admittedly. It's what is the right balance. And obviously, notwithstanding recent events in the news, it can make the balance go a little bit further one way. But incidentally, I mean, that situation probably wouldn't have been covered by any public space protection order you could think of.
No.
So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if everyone content, no further questions, we're happy to pass the recommendation for the non-statutory general consultation. Show of hands on that, please. Again, just Gary, thank you. Final item on the agenda is our work programme. We're looking now at our next meeting of the 13th of December, at which we will be looking at the revised street trading policy, the revised taxi licensing policy, and the setting of regulation and enforcement fees and charges. Any other issues that may need to be added, Councillor Jekyll?
Thank you, Chair. Jack, you mentioned previously I spoke to you a review of Beacon Park entertainments being brought before the committee in the autumn. Is that under one of these, or is that something separate?
I believe it is part of a wider review that includes noise as part of it. Christy might have more to add.
Yeah, we're doing it on the basis of the events policy, which comes into the cabinet purview. So it's a much broader review in terms of what the decision is to use that as a council asset. So not necessarily specific to the licensing conditions, but much broader. What's the asset doing and how do we want to use it and make best use of it and balance the needs of the community with park users and the income generating activities. So it's going to be a much wider review that will probably go through the cabinet process first, and if there are any specific licensing implications will come here after that. So hopefully that might be something that will be in December. But yeah, we're doing the lessons learned review from this year's events programme in the next couple of weeks once the relevant officers are returned from there.
Councillor Braga.
Thank you. At the last meeting, I did make a comment asking if the committee would want to have a report on the enforcement of private rented housing standards and also the possible powers that the council might have with the government's policy legislation that they're intending to introduce. I mean, is that something that members of the committee would like to have a report on? If so, I mean, I don't know quite what the process for doing this. I can propose it if you like, and if the committee want it, then so be it.
I think that's a valid suggestion, actually, Councillor Shepherd.
It is a very valid suggestion. My only question to Christie is, do we have powers to look at it in the first place? Is it within our remit?
The committee,
We used to have a housing committee, of course, which.
yeah, I think it would be an overview and scrutiny purview rather than this committee. Obviously, there are specific powers that relate to private sector housing. In terms of, but
Policy really, isn't it?
yeah, it's an overview and scrutiny matter rather than this
But you can
committee.
still put, and this, sorry, through you, Chair, this committee can actually, you can sort of say, we as a committee request overview scrutiny, look at this, so by all means, you can still have that discussion, and then as a group through you, Chair, that goes to the Chair of overview and scrutiny to decide whether to add it to their work number.
I mean, if that's the best way forward, at the presentation we had at the last meeting, it was stated that there were enforcement powers, and it was just, I was interested to find out what they were. So I kind of thought this was the place where a report on what the council's powers are to come to, but if it's more appropriate, then.
If it's just that you want to know what the process is, absolutely, we can
Do a
just
training.
get that to you yourselves as members, not necessarily through the committee process, and then following that information, if you still feel that's there may be an issue or something needs to be reviewed, then we can go through what we said and put that request through to overview.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like a good process. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, just noticing on the work programme that it's at the moment very thin for February. It might fatten up, as it were, but I think it does need to do that. And so are there any things that are likely to crop up? Because although February seems a long time in the distance, when you're my age, it isn't. It's virtually tomorrow. So I do think that we need to be aware that we need items on the agenda that are more than single ones. And I know that in the past things have cropped up. And looking at this, it's 433. So I think it's important that we do have other issues, if possible, on that agenda. Because it really makes people think, can I be bothered to go?
Well, this housing one may well crop up on that. Far enough in the distance to have gone through by then. So, without any further questions about the future programme, then I will call the meeting to a close at 18:38. Thank you for your attendance, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for those